Devlin, Untamed.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Platform.
iOS, it's only sport. Martin Devlin, Lachlan War. It is only sport. That's what we talk about. Not wholly on the platform. I mean, the platform, 9 hours of free broadcasting every day, kicking off at 7 o'clock with Sean Plunket and Michael Laws. And they do the politics and they do the news and stuff. And they go hard like an All Black rampaging forward pack back in the days that you could ruck. And we kind of lighten it up in the afternoon. We just talk about silly old sport. This is the podcast highlights of today's program, including Mark Larkham, Supercars review of the season. First year that the Gen 3 cars, replacing Holden and Ford. Camaro versus Mustang. And Shane van Gisbergen, he has gone now. So the next generation of supercars drivers. No better man than that man, Mark Larkham, to talk about. Greg Martin joins us. Boxing Day test. Are the Aussies looking forward to this as much as we are in 3 years' time? The Big Bash, does anyone still watch? Does he think All Blacks should be allowed to play overseas and still be selected for the All Blacks? Well, what does it matter what any Australian thinks about that? Greg Martin, as always, on a Thursday. Plus, on that, every man, his dogs, had his say since Sam Cane spoke before he starts playing for Suntory in the Japanese League. However, we haven't heard from the Professional Rugby Players Association here in New Zealand. Rob Nichol on the program, and you would expect him and his organisation to be thoroughly supportive of Sam Cane, wouldn't you? Well, maybe not so. Maybe he might side with New Zealand Rugby. Look forward to hearing from Rob Nichol. And Captain Cane. How can we do a sports show today in New Zealand without talking about Kane Williamson? 29 test centuries. And just a really crucial ton for him yesterday in the first test against Bangladesh. We're still behind the 8 ball after day one, but just a patient, superbly constructed innings again. He is one away from hitting 30 test centuries and joining a list of names: Tendulkar, Ponting, Callis, Dravid, Alistair Cook, Gavin Scarr, Steve Waugh, Steve Smith. It just goes on and on. I mean, this is the echelon that he now is part of. A very elite group of men who have overachieved playing test cricket for their countries. But as always, ladies and gentlemen, we begin the program. You know how it goes. As always, we begin the program, tablets in hand. I say, gather my flock. It is time for a sermon. I think Sam Cane's got a damn good point. Let's go to the mountaintop.
We live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots.
Sam Cane probably right. You know, the All Black captain, as well you know, if you've been following the news, has reopened this ongoing age-old debate about whether or not All Black players playing overseas should be able to play for the All Blacks. Just like South Africa do, just like I think every other international rugby playing country on earth does except us. And let me remind you, we don't for very good reason. And that's because New Zealand Rugby have needed to retain complete control over our players for fear that too many of them would do what the cricketers are doing and take the big bucks on off overseas and leave before we've wrung their careers dry here in New Zealand. Now, it does make sense to me. We need our senior players guiding the new generation here, teaching them and setting the standards. We also need our best players playing in our own domestic comps for ticket sales and viewer numbers and marketing reasons. And the continuous argument has always been that the level of professional comp in, say, Europe and Japan doesn't match ours down under, so they won't be battle-hardened or test match ready playing if they do in the English Premiership or the French 14 or the Japanese League. Now, there is an historic element to all of this too. It's a cross-code element. Back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, as far as rugby league went, the Kiwi selectors always struggled with exactly the same dilemma. Guys were producing highlight reels playing in England. Now get selected for tests here versus Australia down under, and more often than not would just be duds when they arrived back to play. Good players, very good players. I can remember the Paul brothers doing it, the Edel brothers, even the Sorensens couldn't convert that form that they had in England into our test match side when selected. The other danger here for New Zealand Rugby is already the domestic comps have been diluted. They're substandard with so many star players opting for sabbaticals rather than staying and playing. Crowds have been lost and TV viewing figures are way down. So you take out the best All Blacks and what do you have left? Well, nothing but another good reason for fans not to be engaged or interested, I suppose. Sam Cane is probably right, but there's a delicate balancing act that remains here, and one that is going to come back and land in New Zealand Rugby's lap. Eventually, you feel that they're going to have to give in. And when they do, well, that is probably the death knell at that point for our domestic competitions.
Devlin.
What do you want?
We want information. Information.
You won't get it.
The platform.
The sports news headlines, Lachlan.
Yes, Martin, where to start? Plenty to talk about. I'll probably start off with the cricket, actually. Because it wasn't an ideal day for our Black Caps over in Sylhet in Bangladesh on day 2 of the first test. New Zealand 266 for 8 through 84 overs at stumps, trailing by 44 runs. Only 2 wickets in hand at the crease. Kyle Jamieson, Tim Southey. They'll be there when play gets underway at around about 4:30 today. But the highlight to Kane Williamson's century. That is at number 29 of his career. He hit 104 of 205 balls. First New Zealand cricketer to score a century in 4 consecutive tests. Now, I thought he was the second because I heard someone say he was the second, but then I've seen a couple of articles to say that he's actually the first.
Yeah, I think that he's the second to score 3 in a row, and that was Andrew Jones did that in 1991. So
There we go.
First to score 4.
First to score 4. Good stuff. He's alongside Virat Kohli and Don Bradman with 29 tons in red ball, one of 18 players all time to have 29 or more centuries. For Bangladesh, though, the day, I think we could say it belonged to them, in a sense. Left-arm spinner Tajul Islam claiming 4 for 89 on a very spin-friendly pitch. As I say, day 3 to begin around about 4:30 today. The Black Caps trailing by 44 runs, only 2 wickets in hand. Sticking with cricket, Auckland Aces batsman and Black Cap Finn Allen has reminded international selectors, cricket fans and everyone alike of how damn good he is with a bat. He smacked and whacked a one-day career best 168 off just 110 balls during his side's 7-wicket win over the Otago Volts. Good stuff, Finn Allen. Can he translate that back to the international scene? Hopefully. I don't know. I feel like there's a big gap between New Zealand provincial cricket and international cricket.
Just a little one.
Yes, a little one. England Test captain Ben Stokes has undergone surgery to address problems with his left knee. Stokes is aiming to regain fitness in time for England's 5-match Test series in India, which starts in January. The All Blacks are set to play up to 15 tests in 2024, including a 2-test tour of South Africa against the world champion Springboks and likely tests against Ireland, France and England on the end-of-year tour. The full 2024 schedule hasn't officially been revealed by New Zealand Rugby, but it is already being promoted, or should I say tours packages are already being promoted on social media channels.
Hang on a second. So a 2-test tour of South Africa, that just means we play both Rugby Championship tests.
Yeah.
Back,
so does
back
that mean
back.
that we're back to playing 6 matches? Oh no, we've always played 6 matches
We've always
outside of
played
a World
6
Cup,
matches.
haven't we? Never mind.
But hang on a second. No, if we're playing a 2-test tour of there, because we always
That means that we must be playing 2 in New Zealand against one of Argentina or Australia. Because then that's a pretty unfair draw if we're playing
Yeah, I was
both
just
over
gonna
there.
say, yeah, you're
Or
right.
do we have 3 matches against them?
Or do we have 3 matches? Well,
Maybe
that
we've
would
got
be
3.
brilliant, wouldn't it?
That would be brilliant. Hopefully we do. So not an easy year for Scott Robertson in his first year in charge to have to play the world champions twice in their backyard. England rugby captain Owen Farrell has made himself unavailable for the 2024 Six Nations in order to, quote, prioritise his and his family's mental well-being. Champions League this morning.
Yeah.
Martin,
Yeah.
2-0.
Yeah.
3-1.
3-1.
Man United were leading away to Galatasaray. A win would have put you in the box seat for a place in the knockout rounds.
Yeah, we still had to get a result against Bayern Munich. But
Your
look,
goalkeeper's rubbish.
we're not good enough.
Andre
Comes
Onana.
down to it. Look, the great thing about sport is the scoreboard doesn't lie, the table doesn't lie. We're last in our group. So
Andre
it says it
Onana
all.
makes save. Onana not making that.
Mate, I've watched a lot of crap football that United have played since I've supported them since 1975-76, and I think this side is...
The worst. Is this as bad as the Rangnick side?
Oh, no,
That was a
this
terrible
goes
team.
back to Dave Sexton, 78-79. And we were awful in those days. We were
That
rubbish.
team 2 years ago, when you had a said record for
this
the
is-
least amount of points you'd scored in the
Yeah, no,
Premier
this
League
is-
era.
no, this-
That was a bad team.
Yeah, I think this team is winning that award already of being the worst in the last 3 or 4 decades.
Results this morning, Man United drawing away to Galatasaray. They sit last in their group, only 1 point behind second place. So I think Copenhagen are sitting second on the they are. So you're only 1 point behind them, but you pretty much need to beat Bayern at home and hope that the other 2 draw for you guys to go through. Other results this morning, Arsenal beating Lens. Is it Lens or Lens? Lens, excuse me, 6-0. They're still top of their group.
Yep.
Real Madrid beating Napoli 4-2, and Jude Bellingham, England midfielder who plays for Real Madrid, became the first player to score in each of his first 4 Champions League appearances for Real Madrid as they saw off a spirited Napoli side. And NFL news, star quarterback Aaron Rodgers has been cleared to return to practice just 11 weeks after undergoing surgery on his torn Achilles. What Rodgers, a four-time NFL MVP, was injured on his New York Jets debut against the Buffalo Bills in September. He's already moving around, throwing the ball. He's in training. Makes no sense. That's what's making news, Martin.
Devlin,
That is a disgusting act.
the platform.
As we began the program today, as began the podcast as well, that thorny old chestnut still a topic of discussion and will be, I think, forever in New Zealand rugby until eventually you would think it does change. I'm talking about New Zealand rugby selecting players to play for the All Blacks who are domiciled and playing their rugby overseas as opposed to our domestic competition. So every single man and his dogs had his say on this since Sam Cane had his in the Suntory pre-season press conference from the weekend. Rob Nichol from the New Zealand Professional Rugby Players Association. You won't hear from him anywhere else today apart from on this particular program. Is he in support of Cane or not? Obviously, the first question is, where does the association sit in terms of Sam Cane's comments?
We're still all very aligned on the situation. I think the current protocol, if you like, that we have in place, everyone's pretty confident in. The key is how that protocol is applied, and there's actually a reasonable amount of flexibility in that. So that's where the answer, I think, lies moving forward and continues to lie. The starting position is, if you want to play for the teams in black, you have to be contracted to play rugby in this country. And then at certain points around certain players, given different situations and circumstances, there can be exceptions to the rules. And you've seen us apply that over the years. What we need to do is be open-minded in how we continue to apply that flexibility and work closely with the players and where they're at in their stages and in their careers to make sure we get it right.
Does New Zealand rugby need to relax this? Is there a time, though, where you won't have to play in New Zealand to get that All Black jersey, or does that have to stay stuck as a policy?
I think our position at the moment is the starting point is you need to be playing rugby in this country, because if you open the doors, then professional rugby will literally dissipate in New Zealand, and we'll end up like football and the likes, and the opportunities and the commercials overseas will mean that players will look to go into that open market. It is a key retention tool. It's a key part of a player's aspiration to be in that All Black. So to earn that jersey and to get into that team, you come through the pathway here, and you need to push out the ones that are there at the moment, to be frank. The problem that we have is actually a really good problem, and probably we've defied logic, is we've got some really experienced older players that have been playing in this country for a long time and for the All Blacks for a long time that are still up for playing for the All Blacks. And so this is really good. And the reality is, if anyone from 17, 18, 19 years of age spends 10 years or 12 years going to the same place every day, doing the same job, at some stage you need a reset. At some stage you need a break. You need something different. And you need to experience something. And we need to be probably better in that space in terms of getting on the front of the wave, working with players that have done their time, that have proven themselves in that All Black jersey, that have contributed, that are approaching that stage where they or their family, or they just want a different scene, they just need to freshen up. And we need to work with them, understand what that looks like, and see how you can help facilitate it for them, help create it for them in a way that maintains their connection back to New Zealand. And that's where the subtlety of it is, and getting, I suppose, creative and innovative around, people call them secondments or whatever you want to call them, in a way that works for the player and works for the team in black. And so, why is it that players go to 6 months in Japan? Why wouldn't you consider the opportunity to say, well, actually, for this particular player, it might be a really good idea to organise for them to go and play in the English Premiership for a year, then come back to New Zealand. What does that do? Gives them a different scene, gives them something that maybe they need from a rugby perspective to improve their game, and allows the All Blacks to have a player experience another competition in a different part of the world. So everyone wins. So why wouldn't you open your mind to those kind of little innovations and tweaks around players who have earned the right and actually need that different perspective or different experience to continue their career and continue, ideally, to contribute to the All Black jersey. So I reckon these are the areas that are key, and actually it's not about changing regulations or changing rules, because the flexibility is there. It's about doing the work to present the case that has the New Zealand Rugby Board saying, actually, this does not undermine our policy, this enhances the strength of the All Blacks, and it's the right thing to do. And that's on us to to work hard at that.
Rob Nichol, boss of the Players Association. When you say being ahead of the wave, can you ever see a time where it might get like cricket, where players cherry pick and say, look, I want to play this particular tournament here, I want to play that season for this, then I'll come back and do that. That, you know, again, this is like looking into the future, and it is ever evolving.
Yeah. You get a little bit of that, but there's a beautiful balancing factor to this, mate. We're talking about the All Blacks. It's not an easy team to make. You've got to be on top of your game. It doesn't matter how good you have been, and I've been lucky enough to know a lot of some of our greatest All Blacks in history. They all know what's required to perform in that black jersey to the level that they expect, first and foremost, and they know that bouncing around and just cherry picking, first and foremost, it comes back to, am I playing in the place that I need to play to be good enough to earn and warrant wearing that jersey? That's what will go through the great players' minds first and foremost. Is this the right thing for me and my rugby? And am I worthy of coming back and wearing that jersey? They'd ask themselves that question. So, some players may be good enough to be able to, at very later stages in their career, I suppose you could, whether you say it's cherry pick or go and play in this comp and then maybe come back for a year and then go and play in another comp. But at the end of the day, there's going to be hopefully some talent here snapping at the heels. And the first and foremost, they're going to have to be good enough to get into the team. And so that's the balancing factor to that side of it. And that's kind of the balance that I really like to it, is at the end of the day, what you want is a situation that, the young players coming through the New Zealand ranks have to be better than the guys that are there now. And we've always been able to maintain that situation. We might have lost one or two players in the last 20-odd years early who were possibly better than the players that came in, but very quickly those players, you wouldn't have gone and selected a player from overseas. And it's hard to think of a World Cup where we would have selected a player from outside of New Zealand for a World Cup squad. And that probably is the measuring factor, is you want the best players playing and you want the young players having to push the established players out because they become better players. And so that's another balancing factor. If an experienced player chooses to take, a secondment with a couple of breaks over a 3-year period, and they lose the edge, and there's someone here that's better, then they're going to miss out anyway.
Mark Larkham is just minutes away. Let's face no time. We've only got about 5. We're going to whip through these. Kane Williamson's 29th century cock-a-doodle-doo. When the bell goes ding, we move on to another topic. Champions League goalkeeper howlers. Whose fault was it? Ten Hag says, as Man United manager, it's my fault. Was it his fault? Sam Kane again. Owen Farrell. Are the pressures too much on these athletes, that a guy's got to take a mental health break from the Six Nations? And is that a result of the crap that he copped while he was playing at the World Cup? Why would New Zealand Rugby put out a statement yesterday reiterating the policy about players having to stay and play here, and no one put their name to it? What's that about? And the Breakers in Christchurch tonight, 3-7 that they are at the moment, playing the Adelaide 36ers. Got to get a win. Let's start with the Champions League. Is Ten Hag right, or is he just absorbing it and he's going to just whip the players when he gets them in private? Because how can it possibly be the manager's fault when a goalkeeper cocks up like that?
Well, he's doing the right thing because he's taking the blame and he's not blaming the player. The worst thing you can do, who's the England manager who essentially did this to David Beckham in 96? What was his name? Glenn Hoddle.
Yeah, hung him out to dry.
Yeah, you don't do that. Even if it is absolutely, utterly, entirely your player's fault, you just don't do it, which is one thing I really liked about Sir Alex Ferguson. It's good that he's taking the blame in front of the cameras, in front of the phone recorders and whatnot. But truthfully, and he will know this better than us, it's not his fault.
No, not his bloody
A manager can only do so much in preparing the team. But when they go out on the pitch, he's not telling Onana, hey, why don't you bottle that save? Hey, mate, when you pass that ball, why don't you pass it straight to the attacker?
Yeah,
he is not doing
that. No.
And when you're when you're playing at this level, you've gone through enough football as a kid, as a teenager, and a young man in your early 20s. Then when you get to that point, you've clearly done well enough to get there. But it's your fault if you're making mistakes. You should know better. Like, I haven't played football at a high level. I've played it at school. I wasn't good enough to really crack the first 11, and I play it socially. And I know what's going wrong on the field most of the time with football teams.
And if you make a mistake, it's actually
I know before anyone can tell me the mistake. Like a social football, I know when I've screwed something up.
Yeah, of course. All right. So he's just doing what he thinks is the right thing. Kane Williamson's 29th century. We talked about this about half an hour ago. Chance of the Black Caps winning. Give me a percentage chance of us winning this test from here. We're 44 runs behind. We've got 2 wickets in hand, but one of them's Tim Southers. He's going to throw his wicket away. So, as he always does.
40%.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's I was going to say it's less than 50, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, Bangladesh did beat us historically here last summer, ladies and gentlemen. We drew that series.
January 2022. Yep.
Drew that series, or was it the year before? Okay.
Year before, yeah. Well, last summer.
I know we've lost
the summer before,
a test over there to them.
I'm not sure. But, look, Cole Jameson and Tim Southee. Look, Cole Jameson's actually handy enough with the bat. I mean, there was talk, through his first 5, 6, 7 tests that should we call him an all-rounder? Because he was actually batting all right. So he's not terrible. Southee's not good. And so he could, if Cole Jameson can put up, 30 or 40, that'd be great. But it's the wickets that are gone, the lack of reliance on the guys that are there and to come, the fact that these are their conditions, they managed to get 310 in their innings. It's very spin friendly, obviously suits them more than us. Yeah, I don't give us as much a chance as I give them.
Craig Cumberland was on the program earlier and he was saying, hey, look, anything over 220, really tough. On the Sam Cane issue, a couple of texts that have come in. One says, Peter Stiftatoy plays in Japan, as far as I know. He's man of the match in the World Cup final. Yeah, he made 28 tackles.
Yeah, but he's a man.
But they've got about 4 or 5 players playing over there, yeah, for sure. On the Sam Cane rugby issue, Jamie says, to me it's like the PGA versus the Saudis, big money franchises versus the international game. If you look at all the professional franchise sports, it comes at the cost of provincial/international patriotic connections. Death knell to them. That's what I fear, Jamie, too. Look, South Africa is a different kettle of fish because their economy completely collapsed and those players, they weren't going to get paid if they stayed and played there. But the deal is that Super Rugby was, I believe, the best preparation for the All Blacks international calendar because our players were playing against the best players in the world. But they're not anymore.
And this is back when Australia, us and South Africa were probably the 3 best. Yeah.
But they're not anymore. And no disrespect to Moana Pacifica and the Fijian and Drua, but, the 5 New Zealand franchise sides every year are more than likely to provide at least 3, if not 4, of the semi-finalists in that competition. It is not a competition, and that's the thing. And so I think that adds another layer to the argument in that if our players aren't getting the quality of the rugby here, maybe that is kind of what's going to squeeze the door open to let them go and play overseas.
Is there a way to get the quality back? Well, probably not, because the quality
South Africa
on Australia being competitive and South Africa leaving. Yeah,
they moved out of the flat. They've taken all their furniture.
Where are the best countries in the world? Well, most of them are in the Northern Hemisphere. Yeah. Ireland, France, England. Okay, and South Africa are playing up in there. And then there's us. Those are probably the 5 best rugby teams in the world, right? And Scotland are sniffing around.
That's right.
So go play with them.
Owen Farrell. Do you feel any empathy at all for this guy? I mean, I do on a human level, of course. Well, it's a big decision, man, when you're the England rugby captain to withdraw from the whole of the Six Nations because, Lachlan, the chance of him getting that position back again...
Yeah, I think... Look, with him specifically, I mean, there's 2 discussions here. There's one about, obviously, the case in point with Owen Farrell, and there's one about athletes in general talking about struggles in professional sport. With this, I mean, he's been playing at a high level for about 12, 13 years, and I don't recall a moment in that 12 or 13-year career up until now where he's pretty much not played for a whole year or 6 months or whatever because of mental health struggles. So he's not someone who seems to have shied away from playing rugby. As well as that, and this is personally just an assumption, I really like Andy Farrell. And I think you are like me that when we had some interactions with him at the Rugby World Cup, he seemed like a genuinely decent, honourable man, played really well as a good coach, and I can only imagine that his son is similar. As much as he's a bit of a buffhead in the field sometimes, I don't think Owen Farrell was a bad person or a nasty person.
No, I agree with you.
So with that, I wouldn't think he'd be someone that, as England captain, to go, nah, stuff yous, I want to have a break. So there's clearly some struggles that have gone on.
Yeah, good point.
In saying that, on a wider scope, I do have a bit of a problem with athletes who say it's such a hard job, this and that, whatnot, I got to step away, this, it's such a hard life. And I just think that, sure, in your own bubble, it's probably hard. There are people out there who are doing... I'm not saying this is Owen Farrell, I'm just saying in general. There are people who genuinely do it tough, who deal with pressures of not making ends meet, not paying bills, working 2 or 3 jobs a day, who can't even afford to raise their kids.
We see them out our windows working at the warehouses across here, mate. They're all working for wages, all of those people, and they put in a hell of a week. We see that. We see the women downstairs looking after the kids. They're working minimum wage as well, right?
The cleaners that come to this office and do...
On the weekend.
On the weekends. Do the cleaning after 6, 7 p.m. and they clearly have had a day job. They're bringing their kids along because they can't afford a babysitter,
Yeah. Okay, I accept that. Finally, Breakers tonight. We're going to win this one, and I say I'm a big fan of the Breakers. 3 and 7. Got to win. This is a must-win game, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've had over a week to prepare for this.
10
and this
days.
Is against an Adelaide side that is around the same position on the table as the Breakers. They have played 1 more game, that being a win. So 4 wins for the 36ers, only 3 for the Breakers. Look, they have to win this game. And they have the tools based on their coach, who you and I both have a huge amount of faith in Mody Mail. and they've got some talented players on their team. There's been a bit of roster turnover, but you got to go on a run at some point. Like, it's all well and fine to sit here and say, "Oh well, no, there's plenty of time left. You've got over half your games remaining. You've got to start winning at some point."
Yeah, they need to go back to back.
Yeah. And maybe 10 days off is actually the perfect thing they needed.
In Christchurch tonight, I'll be watching that. All right, Mark Larkham is going to join us.
Devlin,
Unbelievable. Incredible.
the platform.
Supercars' first season of the Gen 3 cars. This is no more Holden versus Ford, which was the basis of the whole V8 competition since its inauguration in Australia. Now it's Camaro versus Mustang. If you watch your Supercars, you'll know who Larko is, Mark Larkham. He's absolutely brilliant. He's in the pits there. He explains it all just so beautifully, so clearly. Even if you know nothing about the sport, this guy can just paint the picture for you. He's our man, reviewing the whole season. There was always a lot of talk about this, and I've been so looking forward to picking your brain. After all the preseason angst and the chitty chat about it, and even the drivers, Shane van Gisbergen, saying it was bloody boring and didn't like it and complaining about the cars and that. Now we look back at the whole of the season. So first and foremost, how do you assess those cars and the actual racing and the future of these cars?
It's a really good question, Martin. Well, I'm employed by Supercars, so I'm obviously not going to get on here and slam them, but I don't need to, because I honestly think, I said it in the telecast at the end of the weekend, I reckon a big tick, and I tell you why, because Erebus Motorsport just won the championship. And, we've come from a sport that for so many years, the championships have, apart from the really odd occasion, have been the domain of the homologation teams, the factory-back teams, the couple of big teams that represented red versus blue. So when we went to Gen 3, amongst all the stuff that we wanted to do from a racing point of view, like pulling the downforce off, etc., we can talk about, but one of the main objectives was to take out some cost, and yes, I acknowledge that there has been an increasing cost as a consequence of having to build your cars and your spares and engines. But I can tell you now, I'm seeing some of the stuff on paper. The costs are starting now to dramatically reduce, and they will going forward, because previously we had, if you wanted to make a front lower wishbone, you'd go up and down the pit lane. There was a set of guidelines, but there'd be 15 different variants, and each team would change that variant multiple times in a year as they develop their car.
Yep.
So to just do that, you needed a CAD designer and equipment, welders and milling machines and all that. So it was just horrendously expensive. What Gen 3 did is took away all of that and said, no, we're going to leave you the flexibility in the competition parts and tuning the race car, but all of the stuff is going to have commonality about it. So that meant that a team like Erebus could prevail where historically they wouldn't have been able. I had my team. I couldn't develop the parts to keep up with the factory teams.
Right.
So I think that's a wonderful endorsement of what Gen 3 was about.
10 different race winners this year, 6 last year, 7 the year before. Can we tie those stats to this?
Absolutely we can. I mean, with great respect, I don't think the likes of LeBrock or Mark Winterbottom, whilst, a chance at a podium here and there, being race winners, again, thorough endorsement of the category. And, take Shane van Gisbergen's extraordinary talent out of it. Wow, by God. I mean, can't wait for next year because, there's just so many potential race winners. So, yeah, I do. I mean, we took the aero off, Martin, to make them harder to drive.
Yep. To
bring the game more back to the drivers. We took a lot of that technology out that we talked about and the ability to develop the car. So, the likes of a 888 or a Tickford could not just endlessly develop components. And when they pulled them out of the back of the truck on, Thursday afternoon, bang, they're just in the box straight away. Well, now we're not seeing that. And I think the other thing we saw evidence of this year, and I think it even hurt Shane a little bit, I think some of the more mature drivers, the more experienced drivers like Shane, not all of them, most of them, seem to just struggle a little bit. And I think a lot of that's muscle memory and years of tuning the car with the downforce that you had, which is a big implicator, where now look at some of these young guys prevailing that, you're right, Shane was quite negative about the car. go and talk to a lot of the other guys that actually weren't. So it was different for different people.
Larko is with us, Mark Larkham. We're talking supercars. I'm going to ask you some questions here, and some of them are always dumb, and I know that you're very gentle with me about that, but are they easier to drive? I don't know what I mean by asking you that, but I know that you'll know. What are they?
No, they're not easy to drive. They're actually made harder to drive. But what happened, I think a lot of the easy come out, and again, I'm not having a go at Shane, but Shane made some statements on several occasions that you drive around it.
Yeah, he said it was boring and everything. Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Which I don't like when they say that. I think I've said it to you before, Martin. The art of race driving is driving as fast as you can to the grip of the tyre without killing the tyre. So it's no difference to a marathon runner. He doesn't sprint in the first kilometre. He conserves his energy because he's going as fast as he can over the distance, right?
Yep.
That's what you do.
Yep.
He doesn't go slow. He doesn't run at 50%. He runs as fast as he can to make it over the distance with the maximum performance. That is the art of race driving in F1, in NASCAR, IndyCar, and our game. It's just how it's always been. So because we took the downforce off, what Shane's referring to is, yes, you have to drive to the tyre because it'll slide more easily without the downforce. So that actually makes it more of a challenge. Now, because that then becomes sometimes a number that they drive to, because they pre-calculate a lot of this stuff, I get what he's saying. But I actually wish when he said that in the press conference at Bathurst, I think was one of the times where he said he was driving around at 60 or 80%, whatever, one of the journos in the room needed to ask the guy that came second, well, that's not very good. If Shane was driving around at 60%, you must have been driving around at 50.
That's right.
Why the hell weren't you driving around at 100%
there you
to drive
go.
past him?
Yeah.
I think that makes the point. So they were made to be harder to drive. Now, can I just acknowledge, I actually think as a category we made a little mistake at Bathurst with good intention. We took them there on soft tyres this year, Martin, softer than they've ever been, thinking that would really spice it up, more performance and all the rest of it. But what happened is the softer tyre was more prone to degrading because it is softer, it gets hotter quicker. So drivers were being extra careful. Then you saw by the end of the race there was all the marbles offline, which are a result of the soft tyre. So they had to be extra careful to not hit the marbles. So that means you're sort of driving around on some tram tracks. And the result of that lack of risky driving, we didn't see the safety cars that we always bank on in the last, 40 or 50 laps of Bathurst. So I think we'll revisit that decision. Again, it was made with good intent, and sometimes you just don't know these things till you roll them out. So in hindsight, I think that Bathurst didn't prove to be one of our best because of the tyre.
To hear the full interview, download the platform at the App Store. Via Platform Plus, you can go back and listen to the whole show and all of the interviews in full. But just going back to that cricket, many topics there brought up by Craig. And before we actually hook into Kane Williamson, and it was just, getting home from work yesterday, I don't know about you, but I switched on 3 now, and it was just superb because you knew he was going to construct a century. That was the thing. I got home and he just got to his 50, chanceless. He plays like he's on his own planet. He plays like he's on Pluto, and he's just circling the sun quite happily, slowly by himself. I don't think he cares who's up the other end. It's just another guy that's obviously on his team, but it could be anyone. It don't matter to him. And even listening to him afterwards, we've got a couple of bits from the press conference to play you a bit later on. He talks about, he's so selfless. He talks about partnerships, building an innings, all the things that you want your best player to talk about, like not about individual achievements. At the end of his career, he's going to sit back and reflect on the fact that his name is now, or will be, he'll get 30 Test centuries, and he's going to sit back and reflect on the fact that his name is amongst the greatest that have ever played the game. He equalled yesterday Don Bradman's 29 Test centuries.
Next!
Don Bradman, you're in the same conversation with that guy.
I know. And you listed a number of names before that he's sitting along. I think it was 18. He's one of 18 players to have 29 or more centuries. Like Tendulkar, Jacques Kallis, Ricky Ponting, Sangakkara, Raul Dravid, Brian Lara, as you say, Don Bradman. These incredible.
Well, amongst all of those names, the significant thing about all those stats is that apart from Bradman, all of the rest are recent. I'd say, and when I say recent, I mean in the last 20 or 30 years, because they play a hell of a lot more Test cricket. Like Don Bradman only played 40-something Tests.
52.
52.
And then you've got
52 and he got 29
I know,
centuries.
and then Tendulkar had 200 matches.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And, of course, Bradman's average of 99.94, no one will ever get close.
No one is close. I mean, I've got a list of the leading century getters, if you will, in Test cricket, and the next closest person
is Tendulkar with an average around 60. Is that right?
No, Tendulkar's his is actually one of the lower ones, at least amongst these higher these
is
highly
it
ranked
Shark
players.
Callis has got an average around about 60?
It is Steve. It must be Steve Smith. His is 58 point. Oh, his used to be in the 60s. It's now 58, so it'll be Steve Smith who's got 58. But I mean, look, among these players as well, his average is actually pretty damn good. I mean,
55.22 at the moment.
Yeah, it's better than Tendulkar. It's better than it's as good as Jacques Callis. It's better than Ricky Ponting. You know, it's better than Joe Root. It's better than Steve Waugh.
How long is he going to stay, do you think, for New Zealand?
Next!
Is he a man that is now motivated by numbers? Because if he is, he's got 8,200 and change in terms of runs. Is he going to go for 10,000? If he does, that means he's going to have to hang around because we don't play that many tests every year, even though David White, the previous CEO, reckoned that we played about 150 every year. We play about 7 on average. So he's going to have to hang around for at least another 4 or 5 years to be able to achieve 10,000 runs. So I'm not sure that that's going to be his motivator. Plus, he's had a couple of big injuries, obviously, and especially coming back from that knee injury. I always thought that he would last the one-day World Cup and then that would be the end of it. And I'm wondering about whether or not that Boxing Day test in Australia is enough to keep him there for another 3 years.
Yeah, I'd think so. Surely the only real driver now for him, because I mean he's by the numbers and by the visuals by far I would think our best batsman of all time. I don't think there's much of a debate around that. In terms of getting 10,000 test runs, it's going to take a while. And if you're looking at runs, I mean, there's a number of guys with a feat that he just won't get to in terms of runs. So there's no point even talking about it. So I would think it would be silverware, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
looking to win a T20 or an ODI.
Well, let's just do the numbers right in front of us now. If he's averaging 55 and he plays 7 or 8 a year, so he's only going to get 400 runs a year, right? So he's actually going to have to play for about 12, another, as I say, 4 or 5 years to actually get close to 10,000. So I don't actually think it's going to be 10,000 runs.
Next!
Are we going to win this test match, though, Lachlan?
I don't know. I'd lean towards no at this stage.
I'd lean towards a no as well, yeah. Unless... Well, I mean, we're not going to get much more than we've got as far as runs on board first innings at moment. We're going to have to bowl them out real quick in that second innings. Champions League and disappointment again for Man United fans this morning. Again, handy leads and again, blowing those leads and again, goalkeeping errors. 11 of the 13 sides qualified so far come from 4 leagues. That's Italy, Spain, England, and Germany. Dominating as always. Is that ever going to change? And is the winner of this competition coming from one of those 11 that have already qualified? Andy Buckley, BBC commentator, TalkSport commentator out of England with his thoughts. Arsenal hitting Lens for 6, including 4 really early. How good were they?
Yeah, impressive Arsenal. Very good indeed. Nice to see Arsenal in a way getting back to their vintage best in Europe. Never won the Champions League, of course, a record they'll be hoping to put right. And you can't really rule Arsenal out in terms of being Champions League contenders because, all right, they fell short in terms of the Premier League last season. But such is the nature of knockout cup football that Arsenal, a team that I would have thought when the bookmakers are drawing up the odds when they're looking at the 16 who've got through, Arsenal won't be that far off the pace. So, yeah, an impressive performance against Lens. Can they combine the domestic challenge and the European challenge? That's the age-old question, of course. But, yeah, very impressive performance against Lens. And it'd be interesting to just see how far they can go in the competition.
I'm going to avoid the Galatasaray talk for as long as I possibly can. I'm going through a list at the moment. Barcelona, Man City, Leipzig, Dortmund, Atletico, Lazio, Madrid, Inter, Real Sociedad, Arsenal, Munich, PSV. All of these teams through. Any surprises in that long list?
Sociedad, I suppose, because they're very much the not the also-rans, but in terms of the top dogs in Spain, you've got Atletico Madrid, you've got Real Madrid, and you've got Barcelona. So it'd be good to see the Spaniards back in force in the last 16 of the competition. I think Real Madrid really probably will be the favourites to win the Champions League. people might say, well, you're blue, you're a Manchester City fan, aren't they the favourites, they're the holders? But with Jude Bellingham in the ranks, I think Real Madrid were going to take some stopping this year. I think they are the team to beat. Sociedad, a nice bit of romance really about the Basque team being in the last 16. Atletico, Dogs of War under Simeone, how far they'll go, I'm not too sure. And Barcelona, obviously there's a romance with Barcelona, their heritage as well with a trophy, but good to see them through. So we're leading up very nicely, aren't we, into the draw for the last 16, which takes place in a couple of weeks' time, and once we've had the last group games. And I think really there's not that many surprises. Bayern Munich, if you're leading on towards Manchester United, are safely through. And whether Manchester United get there, well, who knows?
Well, whoever wins out of Galatasaray and Copenhagen goes through, regardless. And so what United are praying for here is a draw in that game and then somehow to overcome Bayern Munich. But once again, I mean, this is a team squandering leads. 3 of the matches so far, head leads, good leads. A couple of those matches, a couple of goals up each time. Ten Hag afterwards says, it's down to me, I'm to blame. Look, I like the fact that he's deflecting from his players. As a Manchester United fan, I respect the manager for doing that. But the reality is, these are paid professionals making schoolboy errors game after game after game and not being able to hold a lead. That is criminal in this particular competition. You get what you deserve, Andy, and we don't deserve to be into the knockout stage, and that is as harsh as it is.
Well, yeah, and you're obviously spoken like a true Red, and I respect your opinion on that. And you're right, in terms of blowing away 2-goal leads, it's becoming too commonplace. And at the business end of the Champions League, you just can't afford to do that. So some might say, well, would it be a blessing in disguise if United didn't go through? I suppose the consolation is you end up in the Europa League, so you clutter up your fixture list with more Europa League games. I suppose from the plus side, from a United aspect, is that if Bayern Munich are already through as group winners, might Bayern Munich switch off? Was there an element of that against Copenhagen in the goalless draw? You know, so they might rest a few players and it might play into United's hands and United can do it. But it's very much up to United to perform, and it sounds as though with an Arna again having a couple of howlers, that United again within different form. They looked impressive against Everton, but against Galatasaray, they just didn't do it. Garnacho, of course, scored the first goal. I saw a nice little story with Garnacho because he scored that wonder goal against Everton, the first on Sunday. And apparently, as he emerged from the training ground in South Manchester a couple of days afterwards, he gave the boot that he scored that goal with to a fan who'd been patiently waiting outside the training ground, not just once, but many times. And he rewarded him with a boot. Now, I'll tell you what, that boot will be worth a few quid in a few years' time, because already he will be. But that was some goal. They're talking about overhead goals and the quality of them. To me, that was top draw. That was right up there.
And normally we kick this hour off doing the most comprehensive sports news bulletin package that you will get on any broadcast medium in this country. But locked on hold for a second because our good mate Greg Martin from Triple M Brisbane joins us. And Marto, we just had Larko on. Marto and Larko. He is such a prince of a man. I rate him as being, in terms of promoting his sport, in terms of being an expert commentator, a sideline man, the very best in the business. Do you love him in the Supercars?
Yeah, mate. I worked with Larko doing the Supercars for about 2 years. I don't think there's a better, you nailed it, no better expert analyst taking an idiot like me about, in terms of cars, inside a vehicle and explaining things. It's quite incredible. He is the best there is. Was he all right for a chat? Oh, he's brilliant, mate. He stayed for 20 minutes. Look, and it's just that he you're exactly right. He talks to you like you're a human being. Even though we're all numpties, we don't know anything about it. He explains it so beautifully and so simply. And I just love the fact that, look, a car roars into the pits or whatever thing, they're throwing petrol and tyres around. The guy's got his face and his microphone right beside it, you know? Mate, some of their access to... because... those supercar drivers, they are known here in Australian sport as the most accessible, easiest to get hold of. You know how football players, oh, no, I'm too important. Yeah, no, day off today, yep. Yeah, not them. They know that talking in the media buys their seat, their bum on a seat that they drive around in. So all that costs a lot, so they know they've got to provide access. And He gets the best of the best. Did you watch Bathurst this year?
Yeah.
Or some of it? Probably not the whole day.
Well, we actually saw. No, we were actually flying to France actually, so we saw most of it as that night as we're flying out. Yeah.
I know motor racing is for everyone, but their camera work is quite simply the best of any sporting event in Australia. It is extraordinary, the access and the camera work. So, mate, I'm not a big motorsports fan, but I watch him and Scafey, who does the commentary. Those two and the camera work are just superb.
All right, I know that you earned a shite load of money when you were playing rugby, even though it was all amateur, it was all brown bag. Is Reece Walsh deserving as your... So you've got Corey Parker, you've got Mrs. Parker is on your show, right? Now, Corey Parker said that Reece boy should get paid over $1 million and be the highest paid Bronco ever. Has that received favour amongst Broncos fans in Brisbane?
Yeah, it's easy to say when you're not signing the cheque.
Yes.
I could say, yeah, he deserves $1.6 million. My worry is, mate, yes, he is the best player in the Broncos. They've got to hang on to him. It will hit $1 million because otherwise there'll be someone else who'll offer him 1.3. So, geez, he's come a long way since that season, the season before last at the Warriors.
Yep.
Yes, he's good enough. If they've got the money and they're going to let go of a couple of old blokes, they'll have to find the money because he ain't going nowhere. He is the number one. They did the list of the 50 most important people in rugby league. Okay, last week, he's number one. And because of one thing, not his good looks, his beautiful eyes and his beautiful thighs. Apart from that, it's his ability to drag these young girls into the game.
Go.
His TikTok and Instagram accounts, he's got more than any other rugby league player, and that's why they need to pay him lots of money. Where else? He's in the perfect place. A one-team town I'm still going to call Brisbane because the Dolphins are on the edge. With 2 million people in it, and everyone loves him, and he's engaging women of all ages.
Okay, so the Brisbane Courier Mail this year, before the grand final, did not put out over 4 separate days a different piece of his anatomy that you could stick together with sticky tape and put on the wall, did they? They didn't do it with the grizzled old front rower, did they?
No. The girl sitting next to me at Triple M's has the desk next to me. She built him from the floor up. And when the groin came, she was most excited, then the torso and then the face. She was hugging him hard. It's pathetic, but that's if it takes that for girls to watch footy, that's what the NRL wants because more eyeballs equals more money.
Yeah, it's like Tay bringing the fans to the NFL. Let's talk a couple of cricket things. All right. Does anyone care about the T20 series against India? I mean, does anyone care about that? Even though the Big Show put on a big show, does anyone care about the T20 now you've won the World Cup?
All right, I'm supposed to closely follow all sport for our men's radio show, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And after we were 2-0 down, I could not give a stuff. So, no, everyone just knows it's a way for the Indians to make a lot of money and then pass little dribbles of it onto us. And the boys know. Did you see we sent... The only one still over there, Glenn Maxwell flew home straight after he made that ton. So the only one still there for the fourth of these T20 matches is Travis Head.
Oh, they found him. Did they find him?
I think he's been too drunk to fly home. So they left him there. Mate, no one cares. You know, the T20 circus keeps on going. International T20, if it's not a World Cup, is complete silliness. But can I give you one? So could you imagine if the Indians beat us in that one-day World Cup final, there would have been a street parade through every major city in India and 20 million people would have been there. Okay? Would that be acceptable?
Oh,
You'd understand that?
Yeah, totally. 20 billion probably, yep.
The World Cup came home to Sydney the other day. Pat Cummins and Mitch Stark took it around the SCG at lunch break on a Sheffield Shield game. The journo estimated there were 42 people at the ground and they walked and did a full lap at the SCG and there was no one there.
No.
Just showing they knew how stupid it was. They were cacking themselves the whole time. Here's our World Cup parade in front of 40 people at the SCG. It was just miserable.
Before I ask about it, whether anyone gives stuff about the Big Bash, Marta is with us. Just on that, Travis Head being too drunk to fly back. I got a little tale to tell you. So we were in Vegas at the tour fight in 2000. I had a really good mate of mine. And we'd been just on the RAS for about 3 or 4 days. Anyway, he was still in the same polyester leisure suit that he'd attended the fight with. I basically had to carry him to the airport. He had to fly back to London, right? So he's on a plane back to London. And he had his passport in his top pocket, thank God, because we get to the counter and the girl behind the counter, lady behind the counter is going, is he okay? I'm going, he's fine. He's perfectly fine. Where's your bag, sir? I said, Jesus, mate, where's your bag? And he said, oh, that guy took it. I said, what guy? And he said, the guy outside the hotel. And so there's a guy outside the hotel, a Mexican bloke who just walked past. And I remember the guy. And he said, can I take your bag, sir? And my mate Tim just handed him his bloody bag. The guy walked off. We've never seen him since.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Isn't it?
I love it.
All right,
It
well,
didn't
let's end on a happy note then. Sam Kane has brought it up again, the old chestnut about All Blacks playing overseas, being picked for the national team. Do you guys have an issue with this with your players?
Oh, of course we do. We've got the Ghetto rule where we only allowed 3 overseas players, which is ridiculous because now Super Rugby's collapsing before our very eyes. Is that a generally held?
Yeah, totally, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to become like the Australian soccer team where all our players will be overseas and we'll just get together the few days before a test match and that'll be the Australian rugby team, I would figure. That's where it'll go. There's no dough. So anyone, like what managers don't want to park you in places where you're not making enough dough. So overseas where the money is, the manager will take his cut and you'll be, and they'll have to open it up. Well, the All Blacks will probably start with they'll go something like the Ghetto rule to start, but we've got to open it up because we ain't got enough good players. We'll have to say, if you're good enough and you're playing in France, England or wherever, or Japan, you can be picked for the Wallabies. So, which will just mean more people will go overseas because they go, oh, it's no worries, I won't lose my Wallaby jersey. I'll go over and make 1.2 million overseas and still play for the Wallabies. Great. So be careful, but that's where it'll end up going.
To hear the full interview, download the platform at the App Store. Via Platform Plus, you can go back and listen to the whole show and all of the interviews in full. That's our podcast for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to listen to the entire show, 1 till 4, Monday to Friday, download the Platform app, and via Platform Plus, you can go back and listen to whatever shows over however many weeks at your leisure, at your listening pleasure. Platform Plus. First thing to do, though, is download the Platform app.
Devlin.
Unbelievable. Incredible.
The Platform.